Welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're doing something completely different. We're not just talking about Viking history, we're living it. For the next hour, you're going to experience what it actually meant to survive a Norse winter in the 9th century. No romanticized Hollywood versions, no heroic sagas, just the brutal, beautiful, terrifying reality of making it through 6 months of darkness when failure meant death. If you make it to the end of this journey, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into the long dark together. The first thing you notice isn't the cold, it's the silence. Deep bone-penetrating quiet that makes your ears ring and your heart beat too loud in your chest. You're standing at the edge of what might generously be called a settlement. 7 wooden structures clustered around a central fire pit, smoke rising straight up in the still air like prayers made visible. It's late October in 9th century Norway, and winter has already begun its slow strangulation of the world. The sun, such as it is, hangs low on the horizon like a pale eye barely bothering to open. In 6 weeks, it will disappear entirely for months. The people moving between the buildings don't waste motion. Every step has purpose. Every gesture is economical. They've already begun the psychological shift from living to surviving. A man emerges from the largest building, steam rising from his body in the frigid air. He's built like a tree trunk, broad, solid, weathered by decades of seasons that would kill softer men. His eyes assess you with the practiced efficiency of someone who's learned to sort the useful from the burden at a glance. His name, you'll learn, is Bjorn Ironhand, and he's the closest thing this settlement has to a leader. He doesn't greet you. Greetings are summer luxuries. Instead, he hands you an axe, not ceremonial, not decorative, just a tool worn smooth by countless hands. The handle is stained dark with years of use and what might be blood. Wood, he says, pointing to a pile of logs that seems impossibly large. Split it, stack it, don't stop until I tell you. Your first swing is pathetic. The axe head glances off the log, nearly taking your shin with it. A child, maybe 10 years old, gender indeterminate under layers of fur, snickers from beside the smokehouse. Bjorn's expression doesn't change, but he repositions the log and waits. Your second attempt is better. The third actually splits the wood. By the time darkness falls, and here, darkness doesn't creep in gradually, but drops like a curtain around 4 in the afternoon, your shoulders scream, your hands bleed through hastily wrapped rags, and you've managed to split perhaps 1/10 of what an experienced woodcutter would manage in the same time. But you've split something. That matters. The settlement's rhythm becomes apparent as evening deepens. Livestock are herded into shelters attached to the main buildings. Tools are cleaned and stored with religious care. Losing a blade or handle to rust or breakage could mean death before spring. Children disappear early, bundled away by mothers who understand that small bodies lose heat faster than large ones. You follow Bjorn into the largest structure, a long house that defies your preconceptions about medieval architecture. It's not a drafty hall, but a carefully engineered survival machine. Thick sod walls provide insulation. The peaked roof sheds snow efficiently. Most importantly, a fire pit dominates the central space, tended by whoever happens to be closest when it needs attention. The air inside hits you like a physical presence, thick with smoke, body heat, the smell of drying fish and unwashed wool, and something indefinably organic that you'll later learn is the scent of survival itself. 37 people live in this space during winter months, from infants to elders who remember when the summers lasted longer and the ice came later. Your place is indicated with a gesture toward the area nearest the door, the coldest spot, the draftiest, the place where newcomers and the unproven sleep until they earn something better. The sleeping platform is just wooden planks covered with straw and whatever fur you can claim. You have no fur yet, just the inadequate clothes on your back and a wool blanket that smells like the goat it came from. As you settle in for your first night, listening to the sounds of a community preparing for the siege of winter, quiet conversations in Old Norse, the scrape of tools being maintained, a baby's cry quickly hushed, you begin to understand the first lesson of Norse survival. You are no longer an individual. You are a cell in an organism whose only purpose is to survive until spring. And that organism will keep you alive only as long as you contribute more than you consume. The wind picks up outside, testing the walls, looking for weaknesses. Someone feeds the fire. The flames dance higher, casting moving shadows on faces that have already begun the long winter's transformation from people into survivors. Dawn doesn't break so much as reluctantly acknowledge its obligation to appear. Gray light seeps through smoke holes and cracks, revealing a world already transformed overnight. Frost covers everything: the walls, your blanket, your eyebrows. Your breath creates its own weather system in the small space around your face. Movement begins before consciousness fully returns. Bodies around you stir, feet search for boots, hands reach for the day's first tasks. The fire never truly dies here. Someone fed it through the night, banking coals with the care of a priest tending an altar. Because that's what it is, the sacred center around which everything else revolves. Bjorn finds you as you struggle into boots that have frozen solid overnight. Today you learn shelter, he says, handing you a wooden shovel worn smooth by use. Not just sleeping, living. You follow him outside, where the settlement reveals itself more clearly in daylight. Each building serves specific survival functions: the main longhouse for communal living, smaller structures for food storage, workshops for essential crafts, shelters for animals whose body heat and potential meat make them too valuable to risk losing to cold or predators. But it's the details that tell the real story. Walls built from horizontal logs chinked with moss, clay, and animal hair for insulation. Roofs constructed from overlapping birch bark, covered with sod, that will grow grass in summer and provide extra insulation in winter. Underground root cellars lined with stones to maintain consistent temperatures above freezing. These aren't primitive structures. They're sophisticated responses to environmental challenges that would kill modern people equipped with contemporary technology. Your first task is helping to improve your own shelter. Bjorn leads you to a half-built addition to one of the storage buildings, essentially a large closet that will be your private space for the next 6 months. The walls are up but not properly chinked. Wind flows through gaps like water through a sieve. Pack it, Bjorn instructs, indicating buckets of moss, clay, and what appears to be chopped hair from various animals. Tight, no gaps, air moves, you die. The work is meticulous, cold, and oddly satisfying. Each handful of chinking material you press into a gap makes your future survival fractionally more likely. Your fingers go numb within minutes, but you learn to work around the numbness, to maintain dexterity even when you can't feel what you're touching. A woman named Sigrid, weathered, efficient, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, shows you how to test your work by holding a flame near potential gaps. Where the flame flickers, air passes through. Where it burns steady, the seal is good. Winter finds every weakness, she explains, in walls, in people. Better to find them first. As the day progresses, you participate in a crash course in cold weather construction. How to select stones for a foundation that won't crack when frost heaves the ground. How to angle roof beams to shed snow before weight becomes dangerous. How to position smoke holes to create proper draft without losing too much heat. The settlement operates on principles that seem obvious once explained, but require generations to develop. Buildings face south when possible to capture maximum solar gain during the brief winter days. Structures are positioned to break wind patterns. Walkways between buildings are partially covered and swept clear of snow to prevent people from getting lost in blizzards. A real danger when visibility drops to arm's length. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Norse winter architecture isn't structural at all. It's social. The longhouse layout forces interaction, cooperation, and mutual dependence. Privacy is impossible when survival requires constant awareness of everyone else's condition. The old and young sleep closest to the fire. The strong and healthy take positions where they can respond quickly to emergencies. Everyone has a role, everyone has a place, and everyone knows that individual survival depends entirely on group cohesion. By evening, your small shelter is weatherproofed and furnished with a sleeping platform, a small fire pit with carefully arranged stones and hooks for hanging tools and clothes. It's not comfortable. Comfort isn't the goal. It's functional, efficient, and yours. The first space you've ever prepared with the conscious knowledge that inadequate preparation means death. As you test your fire pit for the first time, adjusting the stone arrangement to create proper draft. Sigrid nods approval. Tomorrow we learn food, she says. Tonight, just don't burn down what we built. The flames catch easily, drawing well, filling your small space with warmth and light. Through the single small window, really just a gap covered with scraped hide, you can see stars appearing in the clear sky. The temperature is dropping fast, but inside your shelter, wrapped in borrowed furs and tending your own fire, you feel the first stirring of something that might eventually become confidence. Outside, wolves howl in the distance. Inside, you add another piece of carefully split wood to your fire and begin to understand why the Norse considered fire divine. Hunger arrives gradually, then suddenly. For the first few days, your modern body fights the reality of limited food, expecting familiar plenty around every corner. Your stomach grumbles with the indignation of someone accustomed to snacks, meals, and second helpings. The Norse diet doesn't accommodate such expectations. Breakfast is barley porridge cooked in a communal pot over the main fire. The consistency resembles wallpaper paste. The flavor suggests water that once knew a grain personally. You receive your portion in a wooden bowl, thick, lumpy, unseasoned, and absolutely precious. This bowl contains a calculated number of calories designed to keep you functional until the midday meal. Eat it too fast and you'll be hungry for hours. Eat it too slowly and it gets cold, becoming even less palatable. Astrid, the settlement's food coordinator, watches as you struggle with your first bowl. She's a woman built for endurance, broad shoulders, thick hands, eyes that have seen too many winters to waste sympathy on squeamishness. Eat, she commands. Don't think, don't taste, just eat. The wisdom becomes apparent quickly. This isn't cuisine, it's fuel. The barley provides carbohydrates for energy. Small pieces of preserved fish add protein and fat. Dried berries contribute vitamins. Every component serves a nutritional purpose calculated over generations of trial and error. People who got the balance wrong didn't survive to pass on their mistakes. After breakfast, Astrid leads you to the settlement's most closely guarded secret, the food stores. Hidden in underground chambers lined with stones and sealed with clay, the community's survival is measured in sacks of grain, barrels of preserved fish, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth, and hanging sides of meat so thoroughly smoked they resemble leather more than food. The quantities seem impossibly small for 37 people over 6 months. You do the math involuntarily. It's terrifying. This is it, you ask, gesturing at the stores that wouldn't feed your former lifestyle for a month. Astrid nods grimly. This is why we don't waste, why we don't share with those who won't work, why we don't keep those who eat more than they contribute. The implications hang in the cold air like visible breath. Your education in food preservation begins immediately. Astrid shows you how fish are cleaned, gutted, and hung in the smokehouse where low fires burn constantly, filling the structure with aromatic clouds that simultaneously cook and preserve. The process takes weeks, but properly smoked fish will remain edible throughout winter and into spring. Meat preservation is even more complex. Fresh kills are butchered with surgical precision. Nothing wasted, everything utilized. Muscle meat is cut into strips and either smoked or packed in salt. Organs are eaten immediately or preserved in rendered fat. Bones are cracked for marrow and saved for tool making. Even blood is collected and mixed with barley to create sausages that taste exactly like you'd expect blood sausages to taste. The preservation techniques reveal the depth of Norse understanding about nutrition and spoilage. Salt draws moisture from meat, creating an environment hostile to bacteria. Smoke adds flavor while depositing chemical compounds that further inhibit decay. Fat creates an anaerobic seal that prevents contamination. These aren't primitive methods. They're sophisticated applications of food science developed through centuries of observation and refinement. But the most important lesson isn't technical, it's psychological. You learn to see food differently, to value calories over taste, to understand that every meal is a gift, from summer's abundance hoarded against winter's scarcity. When Astrid hands you a piece of dried fish that could serve as shoe leather, you chew it gratefully because those tough, salty fibers represent survival itself. Midday brings soup, another communal pot, another calculated portion. Today it's made from fish bones boiled until they surrender every nutrient. thickened with barley, flavored with preserved vegetables that have been stretched to their limits. It's hot, it's filling, and it tastes like hope wrapped in practicality. The afternoon is spent learning foraging techniques for the few edible plants still available. Rose hips provide vitamin C. Pine needles can be boiled into tea that prevents scurvy. Birch bark, properly prepared, becomes emergency food when everything else runs out. These aren't primary food sources, but survival supplements that can make the difference between health and death during the darkest months. As evening approaches and the temperature drops toward levels that make breathing painful, you participate in your first formal meal planning session. The community's adults gather around the fire, and Astrid produces carved wooden tokens representing different food stores. The evening meal is planned like a military campaign, with each ingredient chosen for maximum nutritional and caloric impact. Tonight's dinner includes the last fresh vegetables from the root cellar, prepared with oil rendered from the fat of an animal slaughtered days earlier. There's bread, real bread, made from carefully hoarded wheat and baked on hot stones. The luxury feels almost sinful after a day of porridge and soup, but even during this relative feast, portions remain strictly controlled. You receive exactly what the community has determined you need to maintain function without waste. It's enough to satisfy hunger without creating fullness. The difference between satisfaction and plenty becomes a distinction you understand viscerally. As you settle into your shelter for the night, stomach content but not full, you realize you've crossed another threshold. Food is no longer fuel for pleasure or comfort. It's become a carefully managed resource in a survival equation where miscalculation means death. Every calorie counts, every bite matters, and waste becomes not just impractical, but immoral. Tomorrow, Astrid promises, you'll learn to hunt. Your breath crystallizes in the pre-dawn darkness as Ragnar shakes you awake. He's the settlement's hunt master, lean, weather-beaten, with eyes that seem to catalog movement and potential in every shadow. No words are exchanged. Speech wastes heat and energy that might be needed later. You dress quickly in layers of wool and fur, wrapping your feet in cloth before pulling on boots that never quite dry completely. The hunting party consists of 4 people plus yourself, a number chosen not for effectiveness, but for efficiency. More hunters mean more food needed, more body heat lost, more chances for someone to make noise or mistakes that could ruin the hunt. Fewer hunters mean less capability to carry back a large kill or respond to dangerous situations. As you step outside, the cold hits like a physical blow. The air is so dry and frigid that it burns your lungs with each breath. Stars shine with unnatural brightness in the crystal-clear sky, but the horizon shows no hint of coming dawn. You'll be hunting in darkness for hours yet. Ragnar leads the party through forest paths marked with subtle signs: scratched bark, arranged stones, broken branches that would be invisible to untrained eyes but serve as navigation aids for those who know what to look for. These aren't recreational trails, but survival routes, paths that connect hunting grounds to shelter via routes that minimize exposure to wind and provide emergency shelter options if weather turns dangerous. The first lesson in Norse hunting isn't about tracking or weapon skills. It's about becoming part of the winter landscape. Movement must be deliberate and minimal. Breathing must be controlled to minimize visible vapor clouds. Even blinking must be conscious because the frost forming on eyelashes can affect vision at crucial moments. Your weapon is a spear, not the Hollywood version with gleaming metal point, but a practical tool with an iron head barely larger than an arrow point, bound to a wooden shaft, with sinew and tree sap. It's designed for thrusting, rather than throwing, requiring you to get close enough to prey to risk being injured by claws or antlers. This isn't sport hunting, but life or death procurement of protein. Tracking in snow reveals stories written in footprints, disturbed vegetation, and subtle signs of animal passage. Ragnar shows you how to read these stories, how deer move between feeding and bedding areas, how the age of tracks can be determined by their edges and the snow that's accumulated inside them, how to distinguish between the trails of prey animals and predators that might make you the hunted rather than the hunter. The psychological challenge of hunting in survival conditions becomes apparent quickly. This isn't about the thrill of the chase or the satisfaction of skill. It's about securing calories needed for survival. Every missed opportunity represents meals not eaten, nutrition not obtained. The pressure creates a paradox. Desperation makes success both more necessary and less likely by encouraging rash decisions and poor judgment. Hours pass in careful stalking through terrain that seems designed to frustrate human passage. Dense undergrowth grabs at clothing and equipment. Fallen logs force detours that risk losing promising trails. Creek crossings require removing boots to avoid soaking them, then putting them back on over feet that have become dangerously numb in the few minutes of exposure. The first sight of prey comes after 4 hours of hunting. A small deer, perhaps last year's fawn, feeding on bark stripped from birch trees. It's thin, showing the effects of hard winter foraging, but it represents more meat than the settlement has seen in weeks. The stalking begins. Moving within spear range requires patience that goes beyond normal human experience. Each step must be planned, tested for noise, executed over minutes rather than seconds. Your heart pounds so loudly you're convinced the deer must hear it. Your breathing sounds like thunder in your own ears. But gradually, impossibly, you get closer. The kill, when it comes, is neither dramatic nor clean. Ragnar's spear finds its mark, but the deer doesn't die immediately. There's thrashing, blood on the snow, sounds that will haunt your sleep for days. But there's also the immediate knowledge that 37 people will eat better tonight because of this death. Field dressing happens immediately, while the body heat remains and before the meat can begin to freeze. Every organ is saved. Heart, liver, kidneys all represent concentrated nutrition that can't be wasted. The hide becomes leather, the bones become tools, the sinew becomes thread. Nothing is discarded because nothing can be replaced. The return journey tests different skills. Carrying 60 pounds of meat and hide over rough terrain while maintaining alertness for predators attracted by the smell of blood requires endurance that goes beyond physical strength. The weight must be distributed carefully to prevent exhaustion. The pace must be steady, but not rushed to avoid overheating and subsequent dangerous cooling. Back at the settlement, the successful hunt triggers immediate activity. The deer is hung in the communal workspace where Astrid and her assistants begin the complex process of preservation. Some meat will be eaten fresh tonight, but most must be processed for long-term storage. The hide goes to the leather worker for eventual transformation into clothing or equipment. Your share of the fresh meat at dinner represents the best meal you've eaten since arriving, roasted over the communal fire, seasoned with precious salt. Accompanied by the last stored root vegetables, it tastes like victory. But even during this celebration, portions remain controlled. The meat must last, shared among everyone, stretched to maximum benefit. That night, falling asleep to the sound of wind through trees and the distant howl of wolves attracted by the scent of successful hunting. You understand another fundamental aspect of Norse survival. Taking life to sustain life isn't just necessity, but responsibility. The deer died so you could live. That death must be honored through waste nothing, sharing everything, and surviving long enough to make the sacrifice meaningful. Tomorrow, Ragnar promises, you'll learn to fish through ice. The lake stretches before you like a sheet of hammered steel, its surface so uniformly white and flat it seems artificial. But this smooth perfection masks deadly reality. Beneath the ice lies water cold enough to stop a heart in minutes, deep enough to swallow a person without trace. Today you'll learn to extract life from this frozen wasteland. Eric the fisherman leads you across the ice, testing each step with a long staff that he probes ahead for weak spots, cracks, or areas where the freeze might be thinner than it appears. The ice speaks as you walk, creaking, groaning, occasionally producing sharp reports like musket shots that make your heart skip beats. Ice talks, Eric explains. Listen, when it goes quiet, worry. Your destination is a spot Eric has marked with sticks driven through the snow, a location where experience has taught him fish gather during winter months. The reasons aren't obvious to untrained eyes, but Eric reads the lake like a book, understanding how underwater currents, bottom structure, and seasonal fish behavior create opportunities for those skilled enough to exploit them. Creating a fishing hole in ice thick enough to walk on requires tools and techniques specific to the task. Eric produces a long iron bar, sharpened to a point, begins chipping through the frozen surface with blows delivered at precise angles. The work is methodical, exhausting, and produces chips of ice that fly with enough force to cut exposed skin. The hole that emerges is barely wide enough for a large fish to pass through, lined with ice so clear you can see into the dark water below. Steam rises from the opening as warmer water meets frigid air, a visible reminder of the temperature difference that makes this fishing possible. Fish slow and cold, Eric explains. Easy to catch if you know where. Your fishing equipment defies modern expectations. The line is braided from animal sinew, strong enough to land large fish, but thin enough to remain invisible to prey. The hook is carved from bone, shaped and sharpened by hand, designed to hold fish without requiring expensive metal. The bait is grubs collected from rotting logs and preserved in fat, not appetizing to humans, but irresistible to winter-hungry fish. Ice fishing requires patience that transcends normal human experience. You kneel beside the hole, line disappearing into black water, waiting for the subtle movement that indicates a fish has found your bait. Minutes pass, then hours. Your knees ache from the cold ice. Your fingers cramp around the line. But movement means losing the fish, so you remain motionless despite discomfort that becomes actual pain. The first bite, when it comes, feels like electricity through the line. Something alive is pulling, fighting, trying to escape. Your job is to gradually work the fish toward the surface without breaking the line, without losing your grip, without making sudden movements that might allow escape. It's a delicate dance between persistence and patience. The fish that emerges from the hole, a trout perhaps 2 feet long, scales glittering with ice crystals, represents more than just food. It's proof that life persists even in conditions that seem impossibly hostile, that skill and patience can extract sustenance from environments that appear completely barren. But one fish isn't enough. The settlement needs protein for 37 people, and fish this size might feed 4 adults for one meal. So you return to the hole, rebait the hook, and settle in for another wait. The second fish takes longer to find the bait, the third longer still. By afternoon, you've caught 5 fish. A successful day by winter standards, but barely adequate by survival needs. The fishing hole must be maintained throughout the session. Left unattended, it begins freezing within minutes, creating a layer of ice that must be broken repeatedly to keep the opening viable. This becomes another task in the complex choreography of ice fishing, monitoring the hole, maintaining the opening, managing equipment, and watching for the subtle signs that indicate fish are feeding. As the brief winter day begins fading toward evening, Eric demonstrates the art of preserving the fishing hole for future use. The opening is widened slightly, then covered with wooden planks weighted down with stones. Snow is piled on top to insulate against rapid freezing. Properly maintained, the hole will remain usable for weeks, saving the enormous labor of chopping through ice for each fishing session. The return to the settlement triggers immediate activity around food processing. The fish must be cleaned, gutted, and prepared for preservation before they freeze solid. Working in the communal space beside the longhouse, you learn the precise cuts that separate usable meat from waste, how to extract every edible portion, how to prepare fish for smoking, drying, or immediate consumption. Tonight's dinner features fresh fish roasted over the fire, seasoned with precious salt and wild herbs collected during autumn. The meat is flaky, tender, rich with oils that provide both flavor and essential nutrition. But even during this feast, the majority of the catch goes to preservation, smoked, dried, or packed in salt for future meals when fresh food becomes unavailable. Settling into your shelter for the night, you reflect on another day of survival education. Ice fishing isn't sport, but necessity, requiring skills that must be learned, practiced, and perfected before they're needed for survival. The patience required goes beyond normal human experience, but the alternative, starvation, makes developing that patience essential rather than optional. Tomorrow, Eric promises, you'll learn to recognize when ice becomes dangerous, how weather affects fish behavior, and why some fishing holes produce while others remain barren despite appearing identical. November slides into December like a predator stalking prey, gradually, then with sudden finality. The sun, never strong to begin with, now appears as little more than a pale suggestion on the southern horizon for perhaps 3 hours each day. But even calling it day feels generous. It's more like an extended twilight, bracketed by absolute darkness. Your body rebels against this disruption of natural rhythms. Sleep becomes elusive, despite constant exhaustion. Appetite fluctuates wildly between ravenous hunger and complete disinterest in food. Most disturbing, your mood begins cycling through emotions you can't control: depression, irritability, anxiety, and occasionally euphoric energy that feels disconnected from any external cause. You're not alone in this struggle. The entire settlement shows signs of the psychological pressure that comes with extended darkness. Conversations become shorter, more focused on immediate necessities rather than social connection. People spend longer periods staring into the fire, lost in thoughts they don't share. Children cry more frequently and are comforted with less patience. Bjorn recognizes the symptoms and responds with practiced efficiency. Work routines become more structured, not because there's more work to do, but because routine provides psychological anchors in the formless darkness. Each person receives specific daily tasks: tending fires, preparing food, maintaining equipment, that create artificial rhythms when natural ones fail. The longhouse becomes the center of community life in ways that weren't necessary during lighter months. People gather not just for meals, but for work sessions, storytelling, and simple human contact that becomes essential for mental survival. The fire never dies completely, providing not just physical warmth, but psychological comfort. A bright spot in the endless dark that proves human civilization persists. Your shelter, adequate for October's cold, requires constant modification to handle December's assault. The fire pit must be tended every few hours to prevent dangerous cooling. Gaps in the walls that seemed minor in milder weather now channel enough cold air to create life-threatening temperature drops. You learn to bank fires with techniques passed down through generations, covering coals with just enough ash to prevent flame while maintaining heat that will rekindle when fresh fuel is added. Clothing becomes a complex system of layering that must be adjusted constantly throughout each day. Too few layers, and you risk frostbite. Too many, and you overheat, creating moisture that freezes against your skin when activity levels decrease. The wool and fur garments you wear aren't just clothing, but life support systems that require maintenance, adjustment, and careful management. Food preparation changes dramatically as temperatures drop to levels that make working with water increasingly difficult. Cooking must be planned around the time needed for ingredients to thaw enough to use. Preserved foods require longer preparation times. Fresh foods, what few remain, must be consumed quickly before freezing renders them inedible without extensive cooking. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of deep winter isn't physical, but social. 37 people living in close quarters with minimal privacy and constant stress creates interpersonal tensions that can escalate quickly. Arguments break out over trivial issues: who sits closest to the fire, how food is distributed, whether someone is contributing fairly to communal work. Bjorn manages these conflicts with techniques that balance authority with community cohesion. Serious disputes are addressed publicly, with the entire community witnessing resolution. Punishments focus on exclusion from privileges rather than physical harm, being required to eat after others, sleeping farther from the fire, or being assigned less desirable work tasks. The psychological pressure affects different people in different ways. Some become withdrawn, speaking only when necessary, spending long periods engaged in solitary activities. Others become hyperactive, talking constantly, starting projects that are abandoned when attention wanes. A few show signs of more serious psychological stress: paranoia, aggression, or depression so severe it affects their ability to function. You develop your own coping mechanisms as December progresses. Carving simple figures from scraps of wood provides hands-on activity that produces tangible results. Maintaining your shelter to higher standards than strictly necessary gives you control over something in a situation where most factors remain beyond individual influence. Most importantly, you learn to find satisfaction in small accomplishments: successfully maintaining a fire through the night, completing repair work on equipment, or helping others with their survival tasks. The community responds to the deepening dark with increased emphasis on activities that provide psychological relief. Storytelling sessions become longer and more elaborate, with tales that transport listeners to other times and places. Music, provided by simple instruments carved from wood and bone, offers emotional expression that ordinary conversation can't provide. Even children's games become more important, as sources of laughter and playfulness in otherwise grim circumstances. As December continues its relentless progression toward the winter solstice, you begin understanding that surviving Norse winter isn't just about maintaining physical health and securing adequate resources. It's about preserving mental and emotional stability during months of conditions that challenge fundamental human needs for light, variety, and normal social interaction. The darkness outside seems to press against the walls like something alive and malevolent. But inside, around the fire that burns constantly, surrounded by people who have committed their survival to mutual dependence, you begin to find rhythms and routines that make endurance possible. December 21st arrives without fanfare. There's no sunrise to mark the occasion, no dramatic change in conditions to announce the year's shortest day. But every person in the settlement knows what this date means. The turning point, the moment when darkness stops advancing and begins its slow retreat toward light. The winter solstice celebration isn't the cheerful festival you might expect. There's no feast because food stores are already showing strain. There are no gifts because nothing can be spared for non-essential purposes. Instead, the observance focuses on acknowledgement, recognition that the worst darkness is passing, and that survival remains possible for those strong enough to endure. Sigrid leads the community in preparations that blend practical necessity with ritual significance. Every fire in the settlement is extinguished deliberately, leaving only cold ashes and the psychological weight of complete darkness. The symbolic death of light must be experienced fully before rebirth can begin. Working by touch and memory in absolute darkness, selected community members prepare the solstice fire using techniques that predate iron tools. Flint strikes steel, producing sparks that catch in carefully prepared tinder made from birch bark and dried moss. The spark grows to flame, flame to fire, fire to the blaze that will burn throughout the longest night. As the new fire catches and grows, its light reveals faces marked by months of winter stress, but also by determination that has carried them to this crucial turning point. The fire doesn't just provide warmth and light. It represents the community's refusal to surrender to the darkness, their commitment to persist until spring returns. The solstice meal uses ingredients hoarded specifically for this occasion: preserved apples, dried berries, honey mead that has been fermenting since autumn, luxury items that would normally be saved for true emergencies, but are shared now to mark survival's continuation. The portions remain small by necessity, but the psychological impact of eating special food on this special night provides nourishment that goes beyond mere calories. Storytelling on solstice night focuses on tales of endurance, perseverance, and triumph over adversity. These aren't entertainment, but psychological preparation for the months still ahead. Each story reinforces the message that survival is possible, that others have faced similar challenges and prevailed. That endurance through hardship leads to eventual reward. The community's children receive special attention during solstice observations. They are told stories specific to their age, given small gifts carved from wood or bone, included in activities that help them understand their role in the community's survival. Children represent the future that makes present suffering meaningful, the proof that endurance serves a purpose beyond mere continuation. As the night progresses, the solstice fire becomes the focus for individual reflection and commitment. Each person adds fuel to the flames while making private acknowledgments of what they've endured and what they still must face. The ritual creates a sense of shared purpose that transcends individual survival to encompass community continuation. You participate in this ancient ceremony with growing understanding of its psychological necessity. The solstice marks not just the turning of seasons, but the turning of hope from mere possibility to reasonable expectation. The worst darkness has passed. From this point forward, each day will contain marginally more light than the one before. The practical preparations for the remainder of winter intensify after solstice. Food stores are inventoried more carefully, with consumption adjusted to ensure supplies last until foraging becomes possible in spring. Equipment is inspected and repaired to prevent failures during the coldest months still ahead. Everyone's health is assessed to identify potential problems before they become life-threatening. But perhaps most importantly, the solstice marks a psychological shift from day-to-day survival to strategic endurance. The community has proven its ability to persist through the worst conditions. Now the challenge becomes maintaining that persistence until environmental conditions improve enough to allow recovery. The solstice fire burns throughout the night, tended continuously by volunteers who take turns ensuring it never dies. By morning, marked by the faintest lightening of the eastern sky, the flames have consumed a significant amount of precious fuel. But nobody considers this waste. The fire represents investment in morale, in hope, in the psychological resources needed to complete winter's passage. As you settle into your shelter after the solstice celebration, you carry with you a new understanding of time's passage during extreme conditions. The days are still short, the cold still brutal, but something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer falling into darkness. You're climbing toward light. January brings cold that redefines your understanding of the word. This isn't the sharp, clean cold of early winter, but something that feels alive and malicious. A presence that seeks out every gap in your defenses, every moment of inattention, every weakness in your preparation. The air itself becomes hostile, so frigid that breathing requires conscious effort to avoid shocking your lungs. Your morning routine now includes checking for frostbite, examining fingers, toes, nose, and ears for the telltale white patches that indicate tissue damage. The inspection becomes as automatic as breathing because in these temperatures, exposed skin can freeze in minutes. You learn to recognize the stages of cold injury, the initial stinging, the numbness that follows, the dangerous euphoria that comes just before serious damage occurs. Water becomes a constant challenge. The settlement's main water source, a spring that flows year-round, now produces water that freezes solid within minutes of being collected. Every container must be kept close to heat sources to prevent ice formation. Washing becomes a luxury, attempted only when absolutely necessary, using the minimum amount of precious heated water. The longhouse atmosphere grows heavier as people spend increasing amounts of time huddled together around the central fire. Conversations become sparse, focused on immediate necessities rather than social connection. The close quarters, combined with stress from constant cold, create tensions that must be managed carefully to prevent conflicts that could threaten group survival. Your shelter requires constant attention to remain habitable. The fire pit must be fed every 2 hours during the coldest nights to prevent dangerous temperature drops. Ice forms on the interior walls despite your best insulation efforts, creating surfaces that reflect your breath as visible clouds even inside the structure. You learn to sleep in full clothing, wrapped in every available layer, with heated stones placed at strategic points to maintain core body temperature. Food preparation becomes increasingly difficult as temperatures drop to levels that make standard cooking techniques problematic. Water for cooking must be heated in containers placed directly over flames, a process that consumes precious fuel. Preserved foods become rock hard and require extensive thawing before they can be prepared. Fresh ingredients, what few remain, must be kept close to heat sources to prevent freezing. The psychological challenge of deep cold goes beyond mere discomfort. Extended exposure to extreme temperatures creates mental effects that can be as dangerous as physical injuries. Decision-making becomes impaired as the brain diverts energy to maintaining core functions. Memory problems develop as cognitive resources are redirected towards survival. Most dangerous, the euphoria that precedes serious hypothermia can create false confidence that leads to fatal mistakes. Astrid implements strict protocols for anyone venturing outside during the deepest cold. No one travels alone, regardless of destination or duration. Every excursion requires specific preparations, extra layers, emergency supplies, predetermined turnaround times. Check-ins occur at regular intervals to ensure everyone remains responsive and capable of rational thought. The settlement's animals require increased attention as temperatures drop to levels that threaten their survival despite shelter and supplemental feeding. Livestock are moved into the warmest possible spaces, often sharing areas with humans. The additional body heat benefits both species, but the arrangement creates sanitation challenges that must be managed to prevent disease outbreaks. Work activities become increasingly focused on immediate survival needs rather than long-term projects. Tool maintenance takes priority because equipment failure in extreme cold can quickly become life-threatening. Fuel gathering requires careful risk assessment. The energy expended to collect firewood must not exceed the warmth provided by burning it. Food preparation focuses on maximizing caloric density while minimizing cooking fuel consumption. Despite the harsh conditions, you notice subtle signs that the worst of winter is passing. Daylight, though still brief, lasts noticeably longer than it did at solstice. The sun, when visible, climbs slightly higher above the southern horizon. These changes are measured in minutes rather than hours, but they provide psychological anchors that make endurance feel achievable rather than infinite. The community develops specific rituals for managing the psychological stress of deep cold. Daily gatherings around the fire become mandatory rather than optional, ensuring everyone receives social contact and warmth. Work assignments are rotated to prevent individuals from becoming isolated in solitary tasks. Storytelling sessions focus on tales of successful endurance, reinforcing the message that survival through extreme conditions is possible. Your own adaptation to extreme cold continues developing throughout January. Your body learns to conserve heat more efficiently, restricting blood flow to non-essential areas while maintaining function in vital organs. Your mind develops coping strategies for dealing with constant discomfort, focusing attention on immediate tasks rather than overall conditions, finding satisfaction in small accomplishments, maintaining hope through connection with others facing the same challenges. February arrives with a deception, slightly warmer temperatures that create false hope for winter's end, but experienced community members know better. February's moderation is temporary, often followed by some of the season's worst weather. More importantly, February brings the greatest survival challenge yet, dwindling food supplies at the point when spring remains months away. The morning inventory reveals what everyone has been avoiding acknowledging. The carefully calculated stores that seemed adequate in October have dwindled to levels that require immediate rationing changes. Barley supplies that were supposed to last through March will be exhausted by month's end at current consumption rates. Preserved fish stocks show similar depletion. The preserved meat that provided protein security is reduced to portions that must be stretched far beyond optimal nutrition. Astrid calls a community meeting to address the crisis with characteristic directness. "We have food for 6 weeks at current portions," she announces without preamble. "Spring foraging won't be possible for at least 8 weeks. We can reduce portions, we can reduce people, or we can starve together. Choose." The discussion that follows reveals the harsh mathematics of survival. Reducing food portions below current levels risks creating malnutrition that could prove fatal if late winter weather requires high energy expenditure. Reducing people means making decisions about who the community can afford to support and who must be asked to leave. Starving together means everyone dies with equal nobility and equal futility. Bjorn proposes a fourth option: increasing food acquisition through winter hunting and fishing activities that carry higher risks but offer potential for supplementing depleted stores. It's a gamble. Energy expended on hunting might exceed calories gained if efforts prove unsuccessful, but the alternative appears to be certain failure through inaction. The community votes to implement combination strategies. Food portions will be reduced by 15%, enough to extend supplies while maintaining minimal nutritional requirements. Hunting and fishing efforts will be intensified despite challenging conditions. And, most difficult to accept, the community will ask 3 members to seek shelter elsewhere if they have family or connections in other settlements. You participate in the expanded hunting efforts with growing understanding of survival desperation. The stakes are no longer about successful or unsuccessful hunts, but about obtaining calories necessary to prevent starvation. Every tracking effort, every fishing session, every trap check becomes critical to community survival. The psychological pressure of reduced food intake affects everyone differently. Some people become obsessed with food, talking constantly about meals from better times, planning elaborate feasts for when abundance returns. Others develop the opposite response, claiming lack of appetite and refusing their full portions. A martyrdom gesture that actually threatens group survival by creating nutritional imbalances. You find yourself developing behaviors that would seem pathological under normal circumstances, but represent reasonable adaptations to scarcity. Every crumb becomes precious and is consumed. Licking bowls clean becomes standard practice. Gnawing bones thoroughly to extract every possible nutrient transforms from disgusting habit to survival skill. The hunting efforts begin producing modest success. Smaller game, rabbits, birds, even rodents, provide protein supplements that help stretch preserved stores. Ice fishing yields enough fish to make meaningful contributions to communal meals. More importantly, the activity provides psychological benefits that go beyond nutritional gains, proof that the community retains some control over its survival situation. But success in winter hunting comes at increasing costs. The energy expenditure required for hunting in deep snow and extreme cold is enormous. Equipment wear accelerates under harsh conditions, requiring repairs with limited materials. Most seriously, the risk of injury or cold-related illness increases significantly when people push their physical limits while already weakened by reduced nutrition. The three community members asked to leave face an impossible choice. Staying means sharing insufficient resources among too many people. Leaving means traveling in dangerous conditions to reach other settlements that may not be able or willing to provide support. Two choose to leave, heading for communities where they have relatives. One chooses to remain, accepting reduced status and the smallest possible food allocation. As February progresses, you notice changes in yourself that reflect the community's overall adaptation to scarcity. Physical activity becomes more deliberate and economical. No wasted motion, no unnecessary energy expenditure. Conversations focus increasingly on practical matters rather than social connection. Sleep patterns adjust to conserve energy, with longer rest periods and reduced activity during the coldest parts of each day. The community's social dynamics also adjust to scarcity conditions. Sharing becomes more formalized and carefully monitored to ensure fairness. Work assignments prioritize essential tasks while deferring non-critical projects. Entertainment activities continue, but with reduced frequency and duration, to conserve energy for survival tasks. The stranger arrives on a morning when the wind carries the first hint of spring's possibility, still weeks away, but detectable to those who've learned to read winter's moods. She emerges from the forest like a ghost, materializing from snow and shadow, her approach silent until she's close enough to touch the settlement's outer buildings. She's young, perhaps 20, but her eyes hold the weight of someone who has seen too much too quickly. Her clothing is adequate for travel, but shows signs of hard use. Torn seams hastily repaired, patches over patches, boots that have been resoled multiple times with whatever materials were available. Most telling, she carries no pack, no supplies, no tools beyond a small knife and walking stick. Bjorn meets her at the settlement's edge with the formal courtesy that Norse culture demands for travelers, but also with the wariness that winter necessity requires. Guest rights are sacred, but resources are finite. The arrival of someone needing food, shelter, and warmth creates a crisis that tests both cultural values and survival pragmatism. "I seek shelter until the thaw," she says, in Old Norse accented with regional variations that mark her as traveling from considerable distance. "I can work, I can contribute. I ask only for enough to survive until travel becomes possible." The request is reasonable, traditional, and potentially impossible to grant. The settlement's resources have been calculated precisely for current inhabitants. Adding another person, even temporarily, means reducing everyone's survival margins to levels that may prove inadequate if late winter brings unexpected challenges. The community meeting called to discuss the situation reveals divisions that have been developing beneath the surface throughout the winter. Some members argue for absolute adherence to guest rights regardless of cost. A stranger seeking shelter must be provided for according to ancient customs. Others contend that survival overrides tradition when resources are genuinely insufficient. A third faction proposes testing the stranger's claimed ability to contribute before making final decisions. If she can demonstrate skills that would benefit the community, her temporary presence might be justified by increased productivity. If she proves unable to add value exceeding her resource consumption, cultural obligations can be satisfied with minimal shelter and food before asking her to continue traveling. You find yourself part of the group assigned to evaluate the stranger's capabilities. Her name is Helga, she explains, and she's traveling from a settlement that was overrun by raiders early in winter. She's skilled in textile work, particularly the fine weaving that creates waterproof fabrics essential for extreme weather gear. More importantly, She knows techniques for processing plant fibers into materials that can supplement traditional wool and fur. Her demonstration of these skills proves impressive. Working with materials available in the settlement, she produces samples of fabric that show superior water resistance and insulation properties compared to standard weaving. Her knowledge of fiber processing includes methods for creating thread from plant sources that grow wild in the local area, resources that could be exploited when spring arrives. The practical value of her knowledge becomes apparent as she works with existing materials to improve clothing and bedding already in use. Worn garments that were candidates for disposal are transformed into serviceable items through techniques that maximize material utilization. Her work effectively increases the settlement's textile resources without requiring additional raw materials, but her most valuable contribution proves to be information rather than skill. She brings knowledge of conditions in other settlements, trade opportunities that may become available in spring, and warnings about raider activity that could affect the community's recovery planning. This intelligence has strategic value that extends beyond immediate survival into long-term security considerations. The decision to accept Helga as temporary community member comes after extensive debate, but with general agreement. Her skills and knowledge provide benefits that justify her resource consumption. More importantly, her presence provides psychological benefits that go beyond material contributions, proof that the outside world still exists, that survival and recovery remain possible, that isolation isn't permanent. Integrating another person into established survival routines requires adjustments throughout the community. Work assignments must be redistributed to accommodate her skills. Food allocation requires recalculation to ensure everyone receives adequate nutrition. Living arrangements need modification to provide privacy and warmth for an additional person. You participate in these adjustments with growing understanding of how survival communities balance individual needs with group requirements. Helga's integration isn't just about providing for one more person, but about optimizing community resources to maximize everyone's survival prospects. Her contributions don't just offset her costs, they improve conditions for existing members. As February continues toward March, Helga's presence proves beneficial in ways that weren't anticipated. Her stories of other places and people provide entertainment that helps combat the psychological isolation of extended winter. Her different perspectives on common problems lead to innovations in everything from food preparation to equipment maintenance. Most importantly, her arrival proves that the settlement's location is known to others, a factor that could prove crucial for trade and mutual support when travel becomes possible. March arrives with weather that seems designed to break the spirit of anyone who has survived this far. Just as hope begins building for winter's end, a late-season storm brings conditions worse than anything experienced during the darkest months. Wind howls with unprecedented fury, driving snow horizontally with force sufficient to strip bark from trees. Temperatures drop to levels that make January's cold seem moderate by comparison. The storm's timing creates maximum psychological impact. After months of endurance, just as people begin believing survival is assured, nature delivers a reminder that winter's power remains absolute until spring actually arrives. The brutal weather traps everyone indoors for days, consuming precious fuel at accelerated rates while preventing any outdoor activities that might supplement dwindling resources. Your shelter, adequate for normal winter conditions, struggles against the storm's assault. Wind finds gaps that seemed perfectly sealed, driving snow through openings invisible under normal conditions. The fire pit requires constant attention to prevent downdrafts from filling the space with smoke or extinguishing flames entirely. Ice forms on interior surfaces despite your best heating efforts. The longhouse becomes a refuge for those whose individual shelters cannot handle the extreme conditions. But the crowding creates new problems. 39 people in a space designed for fewer means inadequate air circulation, increased disease transmission risk, and social tensions that have been building throughout the winter months. Food consumption accelerates during the storm, as bodies require additional calories to maintain warmth in the extreme conditions. The carefully calculated rations that were supposed to last until spring foraging becomes possible are depleted at rates that make continued survival mathematically questionable. Emergency food stores, the absolute last resort supplies kept for exactly this situation, must be accessed weeks earlier than planned. The psychological impact proves as challenging as the physical hardships. People who have endured months of privation with stoic determination begin showing signs of breaking under the additional stress. Arguments erupt over trivial issues. Some individuals retreat into sullen isolation. Others become hyperactive, talking constantly, unable to remain still despite the need to conserve energy. You witness your first case of what the Norse call winter madness, a psychological breakdown that can occur when human endurance reaches its absolute limits. Olaf, who has been growing increasingly withdrawn, becomes convinced that the storm is supernatural in origin. Sent by gods angry about some transgression committed by the community, his paranoid accusations create additional stress for everyone confined in the overcrowded longhouse. Bjorn's leadership is tested as never before during the crisis. He must balance competing demands, maintaining discipline without creating rebellion, conserving resources without allowing people to suffer preventable hardship, acknowledging the severity of conditions without destroying hope for eventual survival. His decisions during these critical days will determine whether the community holds together or fragments under pressure. The storm's duration exceeds everyone's worst-case planning. What was expected to last 2 days continues for nearly a week, with wind and snow that make any outdoor activity impossible. Fuel supplies calculated to last until normal weather returns are consumed at rates that threaten to leave everyone without heat before conditions improve enough to allow wood gathering. Emergency measures become necessary. Furniture begins being broken up for fuel, first non-essential items, then pieces that have practical value but less importance than maintaining life-sustaining heat. Personal possessions that have sentimental value but no survival utility join the fires that keep everyone alive. The decisions about what to burn become increasingly difficult as options dwindle. Food rationing reaches crisis levels. The portions that seemed impossibly small during normal winter conditions are reduced further to levels that provide barely enough calories to maintain consciousness. Hunger becomes a constant companion that affects thinking, mood, and physical capability. People begin exhibiting the early stages of starvation: weakness, irritability, obsessive focus on food, and gradual withdrawal from social interaction. The community's social structure shows signs of strain as survival instincts begin overriding cultural norms. Accusations of food hoarding create suspicion and division. Some people attempt to position themselves closer to heat sources at others' expense. The careful balance of cooperation and individual need that has sustained the community throughout winter begins shifting toward more selfish priorities. But even as individual behavior shows the stress of extreme conditions, community leadership responds with measures designed to maintain group cohesion. Bjorn implements stricter rationing protocols that ensure equal distribution regardless of individual status. Work assignments are adjusted to rotate the most demanding tasks among all capable members. Most importantly, decision-making becomes more collective, with major choices requiring community consensus rather than leadership mandate. Your own response to the crisis reveals psychological and physical resources you didn't know you possessed. The combination of extreme cold, inadequate food, and social stress creates conditions that test human adaptability to its limits. Yet somehow, you find ways to continue contributing to community survival despite personal hardship that exceeds anything in your previous experience. The storm finally breaks on its 7th day, revealing a landscape transformed by snow accumulation that reaches the eaves of buildings in some areas. The cleanup effort requires enormous energy expenditure by people already weakened by extended privation. But the psychological relief of emerging from confinement and engaging in productive activity provides motivation that overcomes physical limitations. The sound that wakes you isn't the usual creak of wood contracting in cold, or the whisper of wind through gaps in your shelter. It's water, the drip, trickle, and splash of snow, melting faster than the ground can absorb it. After months of winter's silence, the active sounds of melting and flowing water seem almost impossibly loud and alive. April has finally arrived with temperatures that rise above freezing during daylight hours, setting in motion the gradual but accelerating process of winter's retreat. The transformation isn't dramatic or sudden. Spring in this climate comes reluctantly, testing every advance with cold snaps and late storms. But The trend is unmistakable, and for people who have survived the longest winter of their lives, any movement toward warmth feels like victory. Your first venture outside in weeks reveals a world in transition. The snow that seemed permanent just days ago now shows signs of weakness, softening during warm periods, developing rivulets and channels where meltwater seeks the lowest ground. Icicles that hung like crystal daggers from every surface begin shrinking, their steady dripping creating the percussion section of spring's tentative orchestra. The settlement emerges from winter like a patient recovering from serious illness, alive but weakened, functional but requiring time and care to regain full strength. Buildings show signs of winter's assault, roofs sagging under snow loads that haven't fully melted, walls where ice expansion has created gaps that need repair, and everywhere the accumulated grime and damage of months spent simply enduring rather than maintaining. But underneath the visible wear, you sense something more important: the quiet satisfaction of survival accomplished. The community has made it through conditions that killed countless others throughout history. The knowledge that they possess the skills, resources, and determination necessary to survive nature's worst assault creates confidence that will serve them well in the challenges still ahead. Food remains critically short despite winter's retreat. The stored supplies that sustain the community through the dark months are exhausted or nearly so. Fresh food sources won't become available for weeks yet. The first edible greens are still buried under snow. Fishing remains difficult in ice-covered water, and game animals are scattered and wary after months of hunting pressure. But the psychological impact of spring's arrival can't be overstated. People move with more energy despite continued malnutrition. Conversations become longer and more optimistic. Work projects that were deferred throughout winter are discussed with enthusiasm that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Most importantly, the community begins planning beyond mere survival toward recovery and eventual prosperity. Your role in the settlement has evolved throughout the winter months from outsider to integral community member. The skills you've developed, the relationships you've built, and the knowledge you've gained about survival in extreme conditions make you valuable not just for your labor, but for your judgment and experience. You've earned a voice in community decisions and a stake in its future success. The first successful foraging expedition marks a psychological turning point, as significant as any calendar date. Helga leads a small group to areas where early spring plants might be emerging, returning with baskets of greens that provide the first fresh food anyone has eaten in months. The taste of living plants, rich with vitamins and minerals absent from preserved winter foods, creates an almost intoxicating sense of renewal. Fresh food, even in small quantities, produces immediate improvements in health and mood throughout the community. Energy levels increase noticeably. Skin conditions that developed during winter begin healing. Most dramatically, the social tensions that built during months of confinement start dissolving as people regain the physical and emotional resources necessary for normal human interaction. The ice begins breaking up on lakes and rivers, creating opportunities for improved fishing while also presenting new dangers. The transition from solid ice to open water happens unpredictably, creating conditions where someone might step onto what appears to be solid surface only to break through into water that's still cold enough to kill within minutes. As April progresses, the settlement begins preparing for the active season ahead. Tools that were maintained but not heavily used during winter receive thorough inspection and repair in preparation for intensive use. Seeds saved from the previous year's harvest are examined and prepared for planting. Building projects deferred during winter are planned and organized for execution once weather permits sustained outdoor work. The community's animal population shows signs of recovery as conditions improve. Livestock that survived winter begin gaining weight as supplemental feeding becomes possible again. Wild animals return to areas near the settlement, providing hunting opportunities that were absent during the depths of winter. Even domestic animals seem more active and alert as daylight hours increase and temperatures moderate. Your own physical recovery parallels the community's gradual return to full function. The weight loss during winter months begins returning as food becomes more available and varied. Muscle strength that was conserved for essential activities can be rebuilt through more intensive work. Most importantly, The mental and emotional stress that accumulated during months of survival-focused existence begins easing as normal life rhythms return. With spring's arrival comes the accounting that winter always demands, a careful inventory of what survived, what was lost, and what must be rebuilt or replaced before another winter tests the community's resilience. The assessment isn't just material, but human, measuring the costs of survival in terms that go beyond simple resources to encompass health, relationships, and the psychological toll of extreme endurance. The human cost becomes apparent first. While the community avoided the catastrophic losses that claimed entire settlements in harder winters, the survival wasn't without casualties. Old Gunnar, whose wisdom and experience made him invaluable during the darkest months, didn't survive the spring transition. His heart, weakened by months of stress and marginal nutrition, failed just as conditions began improving. His death serves as a stark reminder that survival isn't guaranteed until normal life can be resumed. The livestock losses are substantial, but not catastrophic. 3 goats died during the late March storm, their bodies providing emergency food that may have prevented human deaths. The remaining animals show signs of winter stress, weight loss, patchy coats, reduced fertility that will affect next year's breeding programs. But the core breeding stock survived, ensuring that animal husbandry can continue. Equipment losses revealed the hidden costs of extreme survival conditions. Tools that were overused and undermaintained during the crisis months now show damage that will require extensive repair or replacement. Iron implements show rust damage from constant exposure to humid conditions inside heated shelters. Wooden handles split from repeated freezing and thawing cycles. Textile goods are worn beyond easy repair from months of continuous use without adequate cleaning or maintenance. The settlement's infrastructure requires major repairs after winter's assault. Several roofs need reconstruction where snow loads exceeded design limits. Wall chinking throughout the settlement needs replacement where ice expansion created gaps. The central fire pit area shows damage from intensive use and must be rebuilt with new stones and improved ventilation systems. But perhaps the most significant losses are less tangible, the psychological and social costs of extreme survival that will take longer to heal than physical damage. Relationships strained by months of close quarters and survival, stress need time and attention to repair. Individual psychological health requires recovery from the trauma of sustained life-threatening conditions. The community's social fabric, while intact, shows signs of wear that must be addressed to ensure future resilience. Food stores are completely exhausted, leaving the community dependent on daily foraging, hunting, and fishing for sustenance until crops can be planted, grown, and harvested. This dependence creates vulnerability that will persist for months. Any failure in food acquisition during the recovery period could recreate winter's starvation conditions despite improved weather. The accounting also reveals what was preserved and gained during the winter ordeal. The community's survival demonstrates the effectiveness of their preparation, organization, and mutual support systems. Knowledge gained during the crisis, new techniques for food preservation, improved methods for maintaining equipment under extreme conditions, better understanding of human resource management during stress, represents valuable learning that will benefit future survival efforts. New relationships formed during the crisis, including your own integration into the community and Helga's successful addition to the group, demonstrate the community's capacity for growth and adaptation, even under the most challenging conditions. These expanded social connections create additional resources for future challenges while also increasing the settlement's cultural richness and diversity. The skill development that occurred throughout winter represents another form of gain that offsets material losses. Every community member now possesses knowledge and capabilities that didn't exist before the crisis. These enhanced skills make the entire community more resilient and better prepared for future challenges. Your own transformation from outsider to skilled community member exemplifies this development. Most importantly, the community's successful survival creates a foundation of confidence and shared experience that strengthens social cohesion for future challenges. Everyone now knows that collective survival is possible under even the most extreme conditions. This knowledge provides psychological security that makes normal life more stable and future planning more realistic. The recovery process begins with immediate needs assessment and priority establishment. Food acquisition receives highest priority until sustainable sources can be developed. Shelter repair follows closely to ensure protection for the active season. Equipment restoration and replacement must happen quickly to enable effective work during the brief warm season. As May arrives with weather warm enough for sustained outdoor work, the community begins implementing recovery plans developed during the final weeks of winter. The energy and optimism that spring brings creates motivation for ambitious projects. But experience gained during winter provides realistic assessment of what can be accomplished with available resources and time. June transforms the settlement from a survival encampment into something resembling a normal human community. The radical changes in daily life that were necessary for winter endurance give way to routines focused on growth, repair, and preparation for future challenges. But the transformation isn't simple or automatic. It requires conscious effort to rebuild normal social patterns after months of survival-focused existence. Your daily routine now begins before dawn, not because darkness and cold make sleep impossible, but because the brief summer season requires maximizing productive hours. Instead of tending fires for survival, you work on construction projects that will improve the settlement's capacity to handle future winters. Instead of rationing food carefully, you participate in the abundance of summer foraging, hunting, and early crop harvests. The psychological adjustment to abundance proves more challenging than you expected. After months of treating every calorie as precious, eating until satisfied feels wasteful and wrong. The hoarding instincts developed during scarcity create anxiety about consuming resources freely, even when they're readily available. Learning to live normally after surviving extreme conditions requires its own form of adaptation. The settlement's population grows as people who left during winter's worst months return to rejoin the community. The reunions are joyful, but also complicated. Those who stayed through the worst conditions sometimes resent those who left, while returnees may feel guilty about avoiding hardships their former neighbors endured. Managing these social dynamics becomes an important part of community healing. New construction projects reflect lessons learned during winter survival. Buildings incorporate improved insulation techniques developed through necessity. Storage facilities are expanded and better designed for food preservation. The central hearth area receives upgrades that will provide better heat distribution and smoke management during future winter months. Your role in these projects demonstrates how completely you've integrated into the community. You're not assigned tasks, but trusted to identify needs and organize work to address them. Your judgment about construction priorities, resource allocation, and work scheduling carries weight equal to that of people who've lived here for decades. The integration isn't just social, but professional. You've become a full participant in community decision-making. The arrival of traders from distant settlements brings both opportunity and information that helps the community plan for the future. Trade goods acquired through winter handicraft work are exchanged for materials and supplies that will improve next winter's survival prospects. But equally valuable is information about conditions elsewhere, which communities survived the winter, what techniques prove most effective, what challenges are anticipated for the coming year. Agricultural work dominates the summer schedule with urgency born of understanding how crucial successful harvests will be for future survival. Crop selection focuses on varieties that provide maximum nutrition and calories while requiring minimal processing for storage. Garden plots are expanded using techniques learned from Helga and other newcomers who bring knowledge from different regions. The success of fishing and hunting during summer abundance creates opportunities to accumulate preserved food stores larger than those consumed during the past winter. This surplus represents insurance against future emergencies and the possibility of supporting additional community members if circumstances require expansion. The abundance also provides trade goods for acquiring resources not available locally. Social activities resume as people regain the physical and emotional energy necessary for entertainment, celebration, and cultural expression. Storytelling sessions focus less on survival tales and more on traditions, humor, and creative expression. Music and crafts flourish as people have time and resources for activities beyond immediate necessity. Your own social integration reaches full completion during summer celebrations, where you're not just included, but expected to contribute to community entertainment and cultural activities. The stories you tell, the songs you share, and the skills you demonstrate are valued as part of the community's cultural wealth rather than judged as foreign or different. As autumn approaches and the community begins preparations for another winter, you participate not as someone learning survival techniques, but as an experienced survivor sharing knowledge gained through successful endurance. The transformation from student to teacher represents the completion of your integration into Norse winter culture and the beginning of your contribution to the community's accumulated wisdom. The preparation activities that seemed mysterious and overwhelming when you first arrived now follow patterns you understand completely. Food preservation techniques that appeared crude and primitive reveal themselves as sophisticated applications of knowledge gained through generations of trial and error. The social organization that felt restrictive and harsh demonstrates its necessity for collective survival under extreme conditions. Your contributions to winter preparation reflect the unique perspective you bring as someone who survived the transition from modern to medieval survival conditions. You understand both the psychological challenges faced by people unaccustomed to extreme privation and the practical solutions that make adaptation possible. This dual knowledge makes you valuable for training newcomers and refining community survival strategies. The settlement's population now includes several people who arrived during the previous winter or shortly after, drawn by reports that this community successfully maintained itself through extraordinarily difficult conditions. Your experience integrating into the group provides a model for helping new arrivals adapt to local conditions and social expectations. The psychological healing from winter's trauma continues throughout the warm months, but isn't completed until the community faces another winter with confidence rather than desperate hope. Your own recovery serves as an example of how extreme survival experiences can be integrated into normal life without permanent psychological damage, but only with conscious effort and community support. Teaching newcomers the skills that kept you alive provides an opportunity to reflect on everything you learned during your first winter. The knowledge that seemed overwhelming when you were learning it now feels natural and instinctive. But communicating it to others requires conscious analysis of techniques that have become automatic, helping you understand the depth of your adaptation. The community's preparation for the coming winter incorporates improvements suggested by the previous year's experience. Food storage systems are enhanced based on what worked well and what proved inadequate. Shelter modifications reflect lessons learned about heat management and social dynamics during extended confinement. Work organization plans account for the psychological stresses that emerge during survival conditions. Your participation in these planning activities demonstrates complete integration into the community's decision-making processes. Your opinions about resource allocation, social organization, and survival strategies are valued equally with those of people born into this culture. The integration represents not just personal achievement, but successful preservation of valuable knowledge gained through extreme experience. As the first snow begins falling and the community settles into another winter routine, you experience the satisfaction of completing a full survival cycle. The fears and uncertainties that dominated your first winter have been replaced by confidence based on proven experience. You know you can survive whatever winter brings because you've already done it. But more importantly, you understand that individual survival was never really the goal. The true achievement was becoming part of a community that preserves itself through mutual support, shared knowledge, and collective commitment to enduring whatever challenges nature provides. Your integration into that community represents not just personal survival, but contribution to the continuation of human civilization under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The long winter night that once seemed impossible to endure now feels manageable because you're facing it with people who've proven their commitment to mutual survival. The darkness that terrified you during your first night now feels familiar because you understand the rhythms of the cold weather life and your role in maintaining the community that makes survival possible. As you settle into your shelter for another winter, surrounded by people who've become family through shared survival, you reflect on the journey that brought you from helpless outsider to integral community member. The transformation required abandoning assumptions about comfort, convenience, and individual priority in favor of values based on collective endurance and mutual support. The fire burns warmly in your hearth, tended with skills learned through necessity and perfected through practice. Outside, the wind carries the promise of months of cold and darkness ahead. But inside, surrounded by the tools, knowledge, and relationships that make survival possible, you face the winter with calm confidence rather than desperate hope. You've learned to survive a Norse winter. But more importantly, you've learned to live as part of a community that makes survival meaningful rather than mere endurance. The long dark holds no terrors for those who understand that human civilization persists not through individual strength, but through collective wisdom, mutual support, and shared commitment to preserving life and culture against whatever challenges the world provides. Tomorrow will bring the same activities that sustained you through your first winter: tending fires, preparing food, maintaining equipment, and supporting the community members who support you in return. But this time, you'll engage in those activities not as someone learning to survive, but as someone who has mastered the art of enduring and thriving under the most extreme conditions nature can provide. The journey from modern comfort to medieval survival taught lessons that extend far beyond the specific techniques needed for cold weather endurance. You learned that human adaptability exceeds what most people believe possible, that community cooperation makes survival achievable under conditions that would kill individuals, and that the distinction between surviving and living depends entirely on the relationships and purposes that give meaning to endurance. Epilogue. The endless winter years pass. Seasons cycle from abundance to scarcity and back again, each winter testing the community's resilience, while each summer provides opportunities for growth and recovery. You age into the role of elder, your hair graying, your hands developing the permanent calluses and scars that mark a life spent working with tools and fire and the stubborn materials of survival. New people arrive each year, some fleeing disasters elsewhere, others drawn by stories of a community that has mastered the art of collective endurance. You help train them as you were once trained, teaching the skills that transform helpless individuals into contributing members of a survival-focused society. Each student teaches you something new about the challenges of adaptation and the varieties of human response to extreme conditions. The settlement grows, but carefully. Accepting new members only when resources permit and integration seems likely to succeed. The lessons learned during your first desperate winter about resource limits and social dynamics inform every decision about expansion. Growth for its own sake becomes less important than maintaining the delicate balance that makes collective survival possible. Your own skills develop far beyond what seemed possible during that first terrifying autumn. You can read weather patterns days in advance, predicting storms with accuracy that seems supernatural to newcomers. Your hands shape wood and metal with efficiency born of necessity and perfected through repetition. Most importantly, you understand the social and psychological dynamics that hold communities together during the worst conditions imaginable. The stories you tell around winter fires include tales of your own transformation from outsider to insider, but also stories of the many others who made similar journeys. Each narrative reinforces the community's values while providing practical instruction about survival techniques and social adaptation. The telling itself becomes another survival skill, the ability to preserve and transmit knowledge through entertainment that makes learning memorable. Your shelter, expanded and improved through years of modification, now represents the accumulated wisdom of countless nights spent learning to balance heat, ventilation, and resource conservation. Young people study its construction as an example of how survival architecture evolves through experience rather than theory. The simple structure has become a teaching tool as valuable as any formal instruction. The relationships you've built throughout your years in the community represent perhaps the most important survival resource of all. These aren't just friendships, but bonds forged through shared hardship and mutual dependence. The people who would risk their own survival to help you aren't motivated by sentiment, but by understanding that individual and collective survival are inseparable. As age gradually reduces your physical contributions to community survival, your value shifts toward knowledge preservation and transfer. The techniques you've mastered, the mistakes you've learned from, and the adaptations you've developed become part of the community's collective wisdom. Your transformation from student to teacher represents not just personal growth, but the mechanism through which survival knowledge persists across generations. The psychological journey from your first winter to your current status as experienced survivor encompasses changes that go far deeper than skill acquisition. Your fundamental understanding of human nature, community dynamics, and the relationship between individual and collective needs has been shaped by experiences that few people in history have survived to describe. You've learned that civilization isn't defined by technology or comfort, but by the willingness of people to support each other through challenges that would destroy them individually. The sophisticated tools and conveniences of your former life proved less important than the simple human capacity for cooperation, adaptation, and mutual commitment to survival. The winters no longer terrify you because you understand their rhythms and requirements, but they still command respect because you've seen what happens to individuals and communities that underestimate the challenges or overestimate their preparedness. Confidence based on experience is different from arrogance based on assumption, a distinction that often determines who survives and who doesn't. Your legacy in the community extends beyond the specific contributions you've made to its survival and growth. You represent proof that integration is possible for anyone willing to abandon assumptions about comfort and convenience in favor of values based on mutual support and collective endurance. Your successful adaptation encourages others to believe that they too can master the skills necessary for survival under extreme conditions. As you settle in for another winter, now you're 15th in the settlement, you reflect on the journey that brought you from terrified outsider to respected community elder. The transformation required not just learning new skills, but developing new values, new priorities, and new understanding of what makes human life meaningful and sustainable. The fire burns warmly in your hearth, tended with skills that have become as natural as breathing. Outside, familiar sounds mark the beginning of another winter. Wind testing the walls, snow accumulating on the roof, the distant calls of animals adapting to seasonal changes. These sounds no longer create anxiety, but provide comfort through their familiarity. Tomorrow will bring the same activities that have structured your life for 15 years, maintaining fires, preparing food, working on equipment, and supporting the community members whose survival depends on your contributions, as yours depends on theirs. But these activities no longer feel like burden or necessity. They've become the meaningful work that defines your purpose and identity. The young people in the community see you as someone who has always possessed the knowledge and skills they're struggling to acquire. They don't remember your first helpless winter, your mistakes and fears, your desperate adaptation to conditions that seemed impossible to survive. Your current competence makes your original transformation seem inevitable rather than miraculous. But you remember. You remember the terror of that first night in an inadequate shelter, the disgust at food that barely qualified as edible, the despair of endless darkness that seemed likely to drive you insane. You remember, because those memories remind you that survival isn't guaranteed or natural, but achieved through conscious choice, sustained effort, and the support of others committed to the same goal. The Norse winter that once seemed like a death sentence now feels like home. Not because the conditions have become easier, winter remains as challenging as ever, but because you've developed the skills, relationships, and understanding that make survival not just possible, but meaningful. You've learned to find satisfaction in work that serves community needs, comfort in relationships based on mutual dependence, and purpose in contributing to something larger than individual existence. The long dark that terrified you during your first winter now provides rhythm and structure that make the bright abundance of summer more precious by contrast. You've learned to appreciate both seasons for what they offer. Summer for its opportunities to build and grow, winter for its demands that reveal what's truly essential for human survival and happiness. Your story ends not with dramatic rescue or return to your former life, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has found their place in the world through adaptation to its most challenging conditions. You survived your first Norse winter, and in surviving, discovered that human beings are capable of far more adaptation, cooperation, and endurance than most people ever have reason to learn. The fire burns low in your hearth as another winter night advances toward dawn, Around you, the settlement sleeps under snow and darkness, sustained by the same principles that carried you from helpless outsider to essential community member. Tomorrow will test those principles again, as every day tests them, and the community will meet those challenges with skills and knowledge accumulated through generations of survival, including the hard-won wisdom you've contributed to their collective strength. The wind howls outside, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of months of cold ahead. But inside your warm shelter, surrounded by the tools and supplies that make survival possible, connected to a community that has proven its commitment to mutual support, through the worst conditions imaginable, you face the darkness with calm confidence. You've learned to survive a Norse winter. More importantly, you've learned to thrive in conditions that would destroy those who lack the skills, knowledge, and relationships that transform mere endurance into meaningful life. The long dark holds no terrors for someone who understands that human civilization persists not through individual strength, but through collective wisdom, mutual support, and shared commitment to preserving what matters most when everything else falls away. Outside, the winter wind continues its ancient song. Inside, the fire burns warm and bright, tended by hands that have learned the ancient art of keeping light alive in the darkness. And in the space between storm and shelter, between individual need and community survival, you have found your place in the endless winter of human existence, not as someone who merely endures, but as someone who helps others endure, and in helping others, discovers the meaning that makes survival worthwhile. The story ends as it began, with winter. But now you greet the cold as an old adversary become familiar friend, knowing that together with your community, you possess everything necessary, not just to survive the long dark, but to find light, warmth, and purpose within it.